So welcome, Shahida. You're the director of the film Exiled. It's about a film about Myanmar and the situation about the Rohingya. You yourself are located in London, right? And you're from Uzbekistan. So my first question is, how did you come up with the issue of, or with the idea of doing a documentary on the Rohingya situation?
Well, I'm a journalist. I used to work in news before, and the issue of Rohingya always was coming up every now and then, ever since 2012. So I was kind of monitoring the case. And then at a certain point in 2016, I thought they really need a big film, a sort of postcard, which will explain to the world the situation and what is really happening and what the origins of this whole crisis. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I just did.
In your film, you shed light on the situation from various angles, and you also talk to Myanmar officials, to Buddhist monks. How did you gain access to those people? Because what I've seen in the past or heard in the past is that getting access in Myanmar is not that easy.
That's very true. Getting access to the officials in Myanmar is almost impossible in certain cases. But I didn't want to make a film which will only talk from the only film which will explain only Rohingya. I needed to talk to the Myanmar officials and people and Buddhists and MPs about what's happening, because from my point of view, it's a documentary and you have to document the full story. It was very hard to get a visa. I had to ask my Ukrainian colleagues to issue me accreditation letter saying that I'm working for one of the Ukrainian news channels. And I waited for my visa for almost 2 months, a journalist visa to Myanmar. And later I was given only 10 days to work in this country. And I have to say, I was very lucky to work with the best local producers over there, and I cannot name them now for security reasons, who really did everything possible to get me access to the people in Myanmar, especially to the General Kinyu, who I actually was very lucky with, because he never spoken to anyone. This is the guy, or the general, who was the most feared person in Myanmar for about 25 years, and he was chief of military intelligence. He is the person who developed the system of Rohingya extermination, creating this one of the most notorious services or battalions in the country, which looked like a bit of a Nazi SS unit to exterminate the Rohingya. So that was his first ever TV interview he gave to me, and I found that this is the most important historical evidence we have so far from the person who actually is a mastermind of the genocide.
How was it for you personally to be filming in Myanmar? On one hand, you gained access to many outstanding people like the general you just mentioned, but was there also a threat in filming in Myanmar and talking to these people for you, or was it when you were there, when you were talking to the people, fine?
It was very complicated because I was not allowed to go to the Rakhine state where Rohingyas live. So I had to negotiate with someone else, a local filmmaker, and send him there to film interviews for me. We were monitored all the time, and at a certain stage, the situation became a bit dangerous, but we managed to escape. The job was to do the filming, get all the possible access, and get out of there. And this is where my journalistic background kicks in, because I worked in quite a few war zones. So you kind of know how to operate. You feel it. And I always say we were extremely, extremely lucky.
I think your film is very extraordinary because it is actually what you aimed with it, at least for me. It's a postcard which gives insights and explains this very difficult situation that pops up in the news sometimes and then goes away, while the situation for the people doesn't change at all. why do you think it's the issue is so underreported in general?
There are a few reasons for that. One reason is that that part of the world, that South Asia, is not really well covered in the Western news media unless a disaster happens, like what happened in August 2017 when thousands and thousands of people were crossing the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh. Unless such disaster happens, this area is not reported. The second reason is that international community, and here I mean the world leaders, don't like the G word meaning genocide. To recognize something as a genocide is a very complicated issue. And I'm very glad that the government of Gambia took upon itself to represent the Rohingya International Court of Justice. This is a remarkable thing. Unfortunately, I think the world is tired in a way from all this news about the disasters and things like that. While my job here was to make sure that when you watch this film, you understand that this is not what happens to Rohingya is not an ethnic cleansing. It's not sporadic violence. It's a state organized and implemented system of extermination of one ethnic minority. And this is absolutely clear from the Rohingya case. And there's a lot of activity going on. The activists are working. The Gambia government, the Mauritius, I think, joins the support. Canada voiced the support for the case. So gradually, very, very slowly, things are moving. In the meantime, we have over 1 million of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh with no hope for the future of going back home or being resettled. We have over 200,000 Rohingya being kept inside Myanmar in the Rakhine state in the conditions which I can only explain as de facto ghettos. They cannot leave the areas. International human rights people do not have access to these areas. They have no rights to education. They don't have birth certificates. For the Burmese government, these people do not exist. They don't exist because they don't registered.
So, if you mentioned that Gambia and Canada are trying to change the situation, but so after seeing that film, you have the feeling like I have to do something, like after most of the human rights documentaries. But what would you advise people who saw the film? What do you have a tip what each and every of us could do to support the efforts to raise awareness and to change the situation?
What the very simple thing people can do is to write to their local MPs, members of parliament, and ask them to raise this issue in the parliament of these countries. This is very simple. The more pressure it is, the better. Of course, a lot of things should be done inside the camp. We have thousands of women who were gang raped by the Myanmar military during the violence, and they need psychological assistance. These people saw not only extreme violence and were gang raped, very often their children and their relatives were killed in front of their eyes. There is a lot of trauma in the camp, and these people need support. Rohingya community is very resilient, and I'm actually very proud to get to know them so well. And of course, education is number one. Education of the kids in the camp is absolutely essential. There is only one school, a functioning school, and these people need to learn. We need to give them skills and prepare them for the future. In the meantime, of course, more pressure, writing letters to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and raising every time this issue will help. The more noise, the better. Unfortunately, one of the deceits of the Myanmar government is because that the Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi is in charge of the country, and she is formerly known as a democracy and human rights icon. She's done nothing for Rohingya, but she's very good in smooth talking to the world leaders and promising to change the situation. This is not going to be changed. As we see now, Myanmar government does not accept Rohingya as their own citizens, which is absolutely false. And you see in the film, we prove that Rohingya belong to Myanmar. They were stripped of citizenship. And what the world should realize by watching this film, that we cannot talk about genocide. After the Second World War, 75 years after the Holocaust, we have exactly the same thing happening in a different part of the world, in South Asia. Exactly the same way of extermination people, exactly the same way of putting them into ghettos, stripping them of nationality, degrading them from the normal human dignity. This should not happen. This should be stopped.
I think that was a very, very strong stand up for the Rohingya people. I would have one last question, because at the festival we talk a lot about impact and campaigns and how filmmakers stop doing just films a while ago, and also getting very political, but also trying to create impact. So if we go to your homepage of the film, we can find the film, the campaign, the shoe campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I thought that was really something very hands-on, practical, besides writing to MPs.
Children. I'm very practical. When the first time I came to the camp, I was astonished by the fact that people don't have shoes. I mean, they were so, especially the children, they walk barefoot. And a situation in the camp, for example, when it's very hot, you can barely walk on the sand. And during monsoon season, the floods are so high, you can actually drown. Plus, we have a hygiene problem. And I was like, these kids need shoes. And shoes are so important, because when you have when you wear shoes, you kind of feel different. So I thought, this is very simple what we can do to collect money to buy shoes. And we managed to raise like about 200 pounds. And you know what? These 200 pounds provided 100 pairs of shoes for kids. And they were so amazingly happy. This was probably their first pair of shoes for their entire life. And simple things like that, you don't need to overcomplicate, but simple things like that, like shoes, like toys, because there are no toys in the camp. I saw one girl who was she found this doll, a Barbie or whatever. I was in a car, unfortunately, I couldn't stop. And she was holding it like a piece of absolute treasure. She couldn't take her eyes. The world didn't exist for her anymore. Her world was this little doll she was holding. And it was so moving. And I thought, these children who saw a lot of trauma in their lives, they were walking through these fields and jungle for weeks, now ended up with no toys, no shoes. And this is very simple thing what we can do for them in the camp to, campaign for that, to send donations, and at least make them smile.
I think you're right there, that we, especially with these traumatized kids, we have to see that they're prepared for their future through education, but also by giving them the opportunity to at least have a glimpse of a normal childhood. So I really like that action very much. And everyone who wants to know more about it, visit the homepage. You will learn quite a lot about the film and the action there. Thank you so much. It was wonderful talking to you. It gave us a bit of contextualization and background. And thank you so much for this very important film.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.